Hello, how's it going? This is me. That's all we really need to worry about, I hope. This is gonna be dense, super, super dense. Real quick, who here has attended any of my talks in this past year online? Okay, great. You're gonna be the only ones with context for the rest of this discussion, because fun fact, this is part 7. I'm gonna get you all caught up on what's been going on over the course of the past year. And we are gonna be talking about data, but fun fact, this presentation right now doesn't actually have any data in it. We've left that for all of the prior 6. Instead, this presentation is a bit of a report out between conversations that we've had between the community world, our industry, and the marketing world. So we're going to be talking about solving this marketing community rift that's been going on. And the easiest way for us to do that is to understand our data stories and our business processes in the marketing team, the sales team, all of these other teams. They're just not well aligned, right? So we have to figure that out. We have to go through that. So that's where we are. Before we get in, we don't really need to worry about me. Here's all you need to know. I build cultural spaces for clients, and I use them to teach the social science of community. That's what I try to do. It's what I try to focus on. I'm very academically based, very academically focused. So there's going to be a lot of theories, a lot of frameworks that we're going to introduce you to. Like I said, dense, right? Are we ready? All right. So as we go through this presentation, I want you to keep 3 things in mind. These are the 3 things I want you to go out into the world with, right? I want you to plan big. We're going to be talking about some big topics, but do me a favor, progress very small. Just make mistakes, because mistakes make better plans. Start by getting good, and then later, after you've made all those mistakes, get better. And the only thing that you can do right now, and this is the promise that I want from all of you, is to learn one thing, plan big, right? And then come back later. I'm always going to be here. Part 1 through 6 is always going to be available on my website, and that goes for every other presenter here as well. So these are the 3 big promises that I have for you. Please raise your hand and say aye if you agree with these. Aye. Great, moving on. All right, so we have a problem, and this is for the community side, right? We are doing 2 halves of the single conversation. What's not working in the current measurement paradigm, the way that we measure online communities for you as community folks, right? We know 10% of members are retained across 6 months in communities. We know that getting on board can lead to 85% more activation in new members. This can happen oftentimes, I think, upwards of 60% sooner for individuals in communities. On average, communities are 30% more activated month over month. This is all coming from the most recent report from Threado. And despite all of that, we're struggling to prove our value, to prove our ROI. We're concerned about our jobs. The very existence of our online communities is dependent upon whether or not we can prove these pipelines. And we have been laid off all year because we can't seem to prove it. Measurement isn't there for us, and we continue to fight with other departments, with sales, with marketing, to determine that ROI. Something is wrong. And Orbit made a question, submitted a question and said, okay, so what are the issues? Automation, integration, data enrichment, member tracking, GDPR compliance, sentiment analysis, cross-platform analytics. All these are problems, and we now have to fix them as an industry? That's a tall order, right? But it's also not just us. This quote from David is not just about community. This occurs throughout every single department. In order for communities to quantify value, no measurable value means no budget. Well, guess what? That's the case for marketing, for paid ads, for organic. That's the case for every department. So there's a problem here. We can spend all of our time talking about the trees. How do you organize your forest? How do you get your data story onto your dashboards? How do you connect it with everything? And that's what all of the prior 6 conversations are about. In this talk, we're going to stop focusing on the trees. We're going to focus on the forest, right? And what this talk is about is bringing into the room a new possibility. It's very idealistic, but borrowing the words of Peter Block, we have to say it to bring it into the room and make any idealistic concept into a reality, step by step. First get good, then get better. We're gonna make mistakes, but what I wanna bring to you now is a structural change, okay? All right, so there are two halves to this problem, right? We have, on one end, community managers saying, users don't use the internet the way that we're measuring it, so I have plenty of ROI that is just not provable. I can't prove it. And then on the other end, marketers are going, yeah, it doesn't matter what people in our communities are saying. It doesn't matter what we do. What matters is the behaviors that are occurring. Are people actually buying the products? Are they making it through the steps in the funnels? The behaviors are more important than what people are saying they want an experience from. So now we have two potential halves to a solution. On one end, marketers are saying community needs to operationalize. We need our community ops to become measurable and predictable over time. And then on the other end, marketers need to expand that discussion, expand what is being measured beyond those behaviors, beyond those transactions that they have into the community world. So this conversation has been happening a lot over time. Like I said, this is part 7. So in February, I went over to MeasureMinds and I'm like, hey, here's what's going on in the community world and why we can't measure it and why we went off and built our own community intelligence platforms. We built Common Room, we built Threado. We've just stopped using your tools. Here's why. And then at CMX Connect and at the CLG campus, I talked to community members and I'm like, here's the tools that you can use that we've kind of stopped using, and here's how we can get them to work with those community intelligence platforms. And all that happened in February. So we focused on marketers and we said, here's what we need in community. And we focused on community builders. Here's what marketing is saying they can do for you. And in July, I published a What's in it for me dashboard training for free on my website. And I'm like, hey, we've had this conversation and we brought it all together and I published it. And I got a lot of feedback over the course of months from that. It didn't solve the problem. Having the data flow, having the structure, having everything included did not solve it. Here's what I provided in that training, right? We have a traditional marketing funnel. This is how marketers tend to do it. They have an action, and that action tricks a flag, and they say, okay, do you actually want this? And then the person says, yes, I'd like to subscribe. And it tosses a flag up in that CRM system. And then the flag says, okay, great, here's the next thing. And it's a conversation that's being had between the marketing team, the sales team, and a single user. But in community, funnels are only part of it because that's a conversation with individual users. We are peer-to-peer. We're having those conversations across everyone, right? So I'm like, yeah, it's a revolutionary view. Marketers, you can use 5 different funnels to connect across an entire community, scope by scope. Your funnels over here on the right, each one of these, each funnel just basically goes around here and it connects to these like orbits. Everything works. It's great. It's a system. It's functional. Yay. Unfortunately, it still doesn't work. And the reason is because we are expected as an industry in marketing and in community to speak the same language despite having completely different measurement systems. Because of this, we have industry KPIs that were created in 2008 in order to prove paid advertising ROI. And that is now applying to modern community, modern funnels, and modern internet. It's not working. So what is present, right? We just spent an entire workshop, for those who did attend the workshop, right? An entire workshop from Richard about all the metrics that work. And it's brilliant and wonderful. And all you need to do is implement it. And you can prove the value of your ROI for your community. But the problem is, what happens if your executive doesn't listen? If your boss doesn't listen? If they don't use the dashboards? If they don't find the same amount of value in the metrics that you are measuring that you do? We're not on the same page with the data that's coming in. We can build as many processes as we want, but until our organizational processes and our very structure is in line, our data isn't gonna work. So, we're talking about structure, right? We're not just talking about the trees, we're talking about the forest. How are our organizations designed to connect with our communities? And further, how do they persist and exist on the internet at large? How do we interact with a better virtual world than what we've had? How do we do that for brand communities? And further, let's apply that to open source, right? Where should your community operations go so that it can integrate best with your community and your wider markets? So I'm going to ask this of all of us here. What marketing department is your community team a part of? Raise your hand if it's marketing. Okay. And sales. Okay. Customer success. All right. Anyone else have other ones, other departments that you sit in? Product team. Yeah, perfect. So we're in a lot of different departments. We can't seem to decide based upon our organization. And yet, the second question, what else do you do in addition to community? You're in product, but I'm pretty sure you do more than product, right? I'm pretty sure people in marketing are also doing support and customer success and sales and all of these different things. We're spread out, right? But we're expected to be in an isolated department. We're siloed. And we get this information all of the time. Last year's CMX was all about ROI across the business by using community operations. Brilliant work, incredible structures, great formats, highly recommend them. They can't be implemented. Why can't they be implemented? Despite hitting all of the different aspects of your business, here's what we end up with. And remember, this is talk number 7, right? So over the course of the past year, we've run into problem after problem after problem. And there are 4 main issues that I've largely come across that prevent us from being like community operations across the business. It'll be great, right? Unfortunately, stakeholder discussion, biggest, largest one, we run into constant walls in that process. Same thing with data abstraction. How exactly are we getting that data to our CEOs in a way that makes sense? Departmental structure seems to be the underlying problem. And then at the very bottom of that, the least important one is actually the community metrics. We're going to go through each one of these issues. I did set this up specifically with this in play because these are the problems that we seem to run into first, second, third, fourth. So we need a better way to collaborate. We have to change how we talk about the problem, what happens in our meetings. Because it's one thing to say the data flow or the ROI doesn't work. It's another thing to go to the marketing department and say, fix this process, these metrics aren't working or they're false. It's another thing for us to view this as the wicked problem that it is. Who's familiar with the wicked problems mindset? All right, great. So the wicked problem mindset is evolved out of politics, out of socio-political discussion. How do we talk systemically about very tough problems? And originally, we had this concept of ethos, pathos, and logos. We have to be persuasive. We give people a floor. They talk on the show floor about specific policies and laws. And overall, they go through 3 phases. The need, why is this a problem, right? What's going on? Why do we care? Into the plan, what's the goal? What are we going to do about it? Why do we even need to care? And who are we going to put in charge of it? And then the practicality. How much is this going to cost us, right? So this is the typical process that we normally follow in a discussion. It ends up being an argument, and that argumentation generates, for us, what we think are solutions. And here's what normally happens, right? We have a need, plan, practicality model. We try to say, hey, this matters to us. Here's why. Here's what we want to do about it. Here's how we're going to do it. Here's what we need from you to get it done, right? And unfortunately, we have to go through this process where we ideate, and then we argue, and then we come to a conclusion. And we're doing this in our meetings ad nauseum, over and over and over again. This system isn't working. Why isn't it working? Well, the reason is because all of this happens in a meeting, and then we go to our individual siloed departments in order to do our convergent thinking. And further, we're doing all 3 of these in a single meeting, over and over and over again, right? In reality, we need to spend more time thinking about the need, and then the plan, and then the practicality. That's 3 meetings. Who wants to have 3 meetings, right? But the reality is we're not making it through that groan zone in any one of our meetings, and we're trying to accomplish 3 persuasive steps in a single go. That's with our key stakeholders. We don't do that for our larger communities. In our larger communities, we recognize the impact of gradual, repetitive meetings, but we don't bring that into our organizations. So now let's talk about the next one, which is data abstraction. Who's familiar with data abstraction? Spent a lot of time with Richard, other community measurements. All right, so here's how data abstraction works. You have a continuum. When things happen, you count them. You have a person at the theater counting each person entering into the theater, right? And then you say, based upon the amount of people that came in, we sold tickets. Okay, great. So because 5 people came into the theater, you must have sold 5 tickets. Each ticket is worth $5. Ipso facto, you sold 5 tickets at $5 each, you made 25 bucks, right? That's how data abstraction works. It becomes less specific, but more aggregate in scale. In marketing, and limited with Jono as well, we have this concept where data abstraction, as our industry in marketing understands it, is down here we have this massive database of data, and it's not useful. It's not telling a useful truth. So we massage it a little bit. We put it into our dashboards, we build a formula, everything becomes useful enough to direct our actions. And at a certain point in time, we become metrics obsessed. And everyone focuses so much on this barrier right here that we're like, but how do we prove ROI? How do we determine accuracy? But in all truth, you can perform as many actions as you would like. We get so obsessed with this concept. So here's how metrics works in general. You have the atomic metric, the action, the calculated metric, your value. You're assigning a value to it. You have a compiled metric. This is the formula, right? $25 gained. And then as you start to build these formulas and you determine the meaning of those formulas, you have these areas here. It's about perspective shifting. So executives, they care about this. Teammates, they care about this. But community members, they care about this, right? Because we're not announcing to the right group of people the right analytics, they don't care. What's in it for me isn't being fulfilled. So we have an issue of data abstraction. And for community managers, it's not 4 layers. It's 16, it's 20. You have qualitative data. You have individuals who are saying plenty of things. So as community managers, marketers are going, what's the problem? What's the issue? What's going on? And community managers are like, too much data, not stored well. It's haphazard. We are reporting it. It's just all over the place. This is the nature of the fire hose that our industry finds itself in. Meanwhile, we have worked within the framework that marketers have provided. We've worked really well within it. Khoros has this amazing setup. Brian has discussed, okay, so at the bottom with actions and individual items, here's what community can do for you. And then once we've massaged it a little bit and we know what we're doing, here's what we can do. And then at the very top of it, in order to grow, we have to systematize it. So we've worked within this model and still it doesn't work because the problem we run into is the attribution issue. And this has been solved in marketing-ish, sort of. It's been solved in sales-ish, sort of. But community just cannot seem to prove its community-generated lead very easily. It's pulling teeth for us. Why? It turns out this is experienced in every department. And you'll notice that we're siloed here. So measurement in our current organizational processes, it doesn't matter how well organized our trees are, the forest isn't working for us, right? Each department is responsible for reporting their own thing, and they have to own their own outcomes. And this is great, right? Responsibility, prove your worth. How do we determine a community-generated lead when marketing's fighting for it too? When sales is fighting for it too, when customer success is fighting for it too, when all of that process results in Google saying, hey, we really have no idea where the lead came from. Moin, moin, moin. You can solve this a few ways, right? And that's what the past 6 trainings where I spent the past year going, yeah, you can do this, absolutely. You can label it as a community-generated lead in your Google Analytics report. You can use a community intelligence platform, something that marketing has no idea existed, despite the fact that we have 4 outside right now. But ultimately, you cannot solve it by making a department self-report, and you cannot solve it by counting your community-generated leads as sales-generated or marketing-generated leads. It doesn't work that way, right? So, as it stands right now, C-suite is responsible for parsing each individual department's reports. That's not going to get us anywhere. And the reason is because the data doesn't work that way. The processes are not aligned that way. Our businesses do not align with the data structures. Here's a better way. We need to focus on building our processes in our companies along the data that is actually happening. The data has already built a story for us, and we keep massaging it, and we get metrics obsessed trying to make it work. But in reality, it might just be a phase shift because the trees are doing fine. We're just trying to make it a grove instead of understanding the ecosystem for what it is. We need to look at super departmental structures. That community ops setup, we can't have a community manager stuck in each individual department. We need, on one end, a facilitator to get the engagement. We need a coordinator to help you organize your infrastructure. You need an architect to build this. And then above it, and yes, we're not the most important here in this department, right? We need to make data, analytics, and reporting its own super department. So that C-suite gets a report on the front end and a report on the back end, and research and development, product support, marketing, and finance are all reporting in the same go. It's a smoother line. That massive fire hose hitting us as community development people, we have so much data and it's haphazardly reported, and the reason is because every other department is suffering that same problem. We have to align it. So like I said, this is difficult, right? But here's what matters. This is the data abstraction process. You can see greater scope is what C-suite cares about. More detail is what your community and your individual departments care about. So down here, we care about behaviors and sentiments. What's actually happening in our community? What is our community actually telling us? What are we actually saying? Our team members should not be responsible for that greater culture or those behaviors. We should be responsible for asking, what precedents are we setting in the community? We think that this is best for this community. And how are we building momentum to build those precedents into culture? That's our job, right? And at the very, very top, Chris Mercer says this all the time, Susie Nelson says this all the time, Ryan Dice says this all the time. Your C-suite only cares about two things. What were the results? How did you get there, right? This is about aligning your business to the data. Ridiculously idealistic, right? Like, how are we gonna do? We can't just rebuild our companies like that. Who has the power and authority to do that right now in their business? Not a single hand, right? It's so idealistic. How do we make it real? Well, we're talking about ROI across the business. We've been trying for years. You just agreed we can't make it real. It's too idealistic, but we're trying, right? So we have to start small. Plan big, progress small. First get good, then get better, right? So here's 3 tools. First and foremost, we're gonna start with where this conversation left off, with the need, the plan, and the practicality. In February, I looked at the need. In March, we discussed the plan. We ran that plan out to July with a training, WIFM dashboards, and now we're discussing practicality here at CMX. We're following each step of that process, and further, we're just starting small with the marketing team, solving that community measurement rift so that we can optimize the data progression. So, here's where I want you to start, right? Community team. Marketers are not just building on Tag Manager. They're not just creating analytics for the sake of building it. They have this entire behavioral infrastructure built, and they have these wonderful little tools that they use to comprehensively understand it. Let's speak that language. Let's translate it, right? So we took this data sheet that Mercer and Juniman created in the marketing areas. And again, this is a sister talk. So in 1 week, Measure Summit, where these two have created a similar CMX thing, this talk is gonna happen all over again, talking to marketers. So I've already set up that area. I've done that handshake. All you need to do now is grab this tool that they created and grab the modified one I'm giving you, so that your community infrastructure, what's the value of your community, how do you provide a constructed review, how do you organize and collect your sentiment data, it now talks to them in marketing. Here's what this needs to look like, here's what Tag Manager needs to grab, here's how Tag Manager needs to integrate with our community intelligence platform, with our CRM. This is their conversation, this is our conversation, and now we have it on a single spreadsheet. We can talk, we can organize, right? And it follows this process, what I call the socially constructed metric system. You collect, standardize, analyze, compile, report, predict, and repeat. This isn't coming just from me. I didn't create this in a vacuum. I created this as a community builder who was responsible for understanding and learning the marketing conversation, right? So because we're on a simple spreadsheet, we're planning the way that we're going to report with marketing, we have now built the first two parts of our community operations super department and our metrics and data reporting super department. We're no longer putting community into an individual department, just like we are no longer making measurement a subsidiary to your marketing department. These are now their own things. They are above the other departments because that's where the data needs them to be. So again, you can actually build this specifically for community teams as well. Again, that WIFM training, it's free on my website. It actually walks you through the entirety of how to use this tool, use this system to collect, understand, and aggregate your sentiment data, and then combine it with your marketing team's data. If that sounds complex to you, though, get an intelligence platform, please, by all means, 100%. These do this independently because we as an industry decided marketing couldn't do it for us. So we went off and we made it on our own. Now it's time for us to bring that conversation back together and show the marketing teams what we've built. So here are some next steps for you. First and foremost, follow this process. Need, plan, and practicality are now their own meetings, and you are going in each meeting to end up at the end of your grown zone. You're going to make your actions and you're going to decide who you have, not just action items for people to go off into their own departments to do. You're going to use meetings to do work, right? They're productive. And then you're going to systematize your data flow, right? These are the next steps. Who is maybe a little bit scared of this? Yeah? If you're scared of it, contact me. There's an entire free training about this. We're going to work through it. We're going to do this together because as community industries, we understand the power of doing things associatively and deliberatively. And I hope that this incredibly idealistic idea of reorganizing our organizations along the modern data pipeline can become a reality, one person at a time, one mistake at a time. Thank you.